Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's May 6, 2024 in Hillsborough, North Carolina, New Goloka. And we're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 51, Text 50. Puraratar hema praishkritas charan matam gajarva naradeva samgnita sa eva kalena durachayena te kalevaro vidkrimi bhashma samgnita. Pura, previously. Ratai, in chariots. Hema, with gold. Parishkritai, furnished. Charan, riding. Matam, fierce. Gajai, on elephants. Va, or Naradeva, king. Samgnita, named. Saha, that. Eva, same. Kalena, by time. Durachayena, unavoidable. Te, your. Kalevaraha, body. Vit, as feces. Krimi, worms. Bhashma, ashes. Samgnitaha, named. So this is Muchakunda speaking to the Lord. BBT translation: the body that at first rides high on fierce elephants or chariots adorned with gold and is known by the name king is later by your invincible power of time called feces, worms, or ashes. BBT purport: in the United States and other materially developed countries, dead bodies are cosmetically disposed of in a tidy, ceremonial way. But in many parts of the world, old, sickly, and injured people die in lonely or neglected places where dogs and jackals consume their bodies and transform them into stool. That's quite an interesting sentence there. I don't know if I agree with it. And if one is so blessed as to be buried in a coffin, one's body may very well be consumed by worms and other minuscule creatures. Also, many earthly cadavers are burned and thus transformed into ashes. In any case, death is certain and the ultimate fate of the body is never sublime. That is the real purport of Muchakunda's statement here, that the body, though now called king, prince, beauty queen, upper middle class, and so on, will eventually be called stool, worms, and ashes. And we're just going to read the Tika of Sanatana Goswami. In dying, the body will take a ghastly form. This is described with disgust. The body which was moving on a chariot becomes ashes, etc., by the force of te, time. Using the masculine for Kalevaram is poetic license. Time cannot be stopped by any means, such as sacrifices or yoga, durachayena, because it is your amsa, te. Pararatar hema parishkritas charan matam gajarva naradeva samgnita saeva kalena durachayena te kalevaro vitkrimi bhashma samjita. The body that at first rides high on fierce elephants or chariots adorned with gold and is known by the name king is later by your invincible power of time called feces, worms, or ashes. So the Lord has offered Muchakunda a blessing. He said, you can take from me whatever you want. And the king is basically giving this description to describe why he doesn't want what he already has. He was already a great king. And as we talked about before, that he was such a great king, even though he was a human, that he was the general of the demigods. He was fighting on behalf of the demigods, fighting against the demons, and his replacement was none other than Kartikeya. And when he was finished fighting, he was told that everything from his own life was finished. His kingdom was finished, his family was finished, everything was finished, as Santosh was talking about this also yesterday. This was his own personal realization. Right? When the time works different for the demigods and for the humans. So he saw that, all right, I had this kingdom, I had this family, I had so much respect on earth, and while I've been fighting for the demigods, it's all gone. It's all finished. Right? We talked about before with this how when, Kutumba, I think his name was, the father of Revati, when he went to hear this, he went to go see Lord Brahma, and he went to a musical performance there. He had to wait until Lord Brahma finished listening to music. And then, why don't we scroll up back to the verse? That's better. And then Lord Brahma said, while you've been listening to this music, anyone you've thought about marrying your daughter has died. He said they're not only them, but their sons and their grandsons, and he says no one even remembers their name. And of course, King Muchukunda just had a very graphic example of this with the killing of Kaliyavana. Kaliyavana was also a king. He was also had his kingdom. And then he comes in the cave and, boomf, when King Muchukunda wakes up and looks at him, he turns into a pile of ashes, quite literally. So he says, what is the use? Basically what he's saying here is, what are the use of these material benedictions? What's the point of them? You can have a beautiful chariot. You can be riding on a fierce elephant. Everyone can call you king. And in time, your body is just going to be stool or ashes, right? Or eaten by worms. And this is actually what happens, right? Even if you preserve the body with chemicals and put it in a coffin, a fancy coffin, eventually it disintegrates, and all that's left is the bones, right? And eventually, of course, even the bones disintegrate. They're finished. So however the body is disposed of, whether it's buried, whether it's burned, Prabhupada will usually talk about, in reference to this verse, how the Parsis, they leave the dead bodies on a mountaintop for the vultures to eat. And so it becomes stool, and those who cremate the body, it becomes ashes. And if you bury the body, then it becomes, the worms are eating it, the different creatures are eating it. I remember seeing a meme, they have these programs that can show you what you're going to look like some years from now, right? They can artificially age you so that you can see what am I going to look like in 10 years or 20 years. And so one of them said, I put in, what am I going to look like in 40 years? And the picture was a pile of ashes. So that's, yeah. But that's actually the truth, right? And we all experience this, right? Whenever there's this funeral renunciation, whenever we go to a funeral, then there's this natural renunciation that happens. There's just a dead body is lying there, and the possessions are distributed, right? Whatever possessions one has. And if you have a lot of possessions, it generally just means trouble for all of your relatives. And we had one devotee here many years ago, Krishna Rupa, and she was telling us how after her mother died, that it took her and the other family members 1 year to go through all of her mother's possessions in her house. So people who have a big house with a lot of possessions, it simply becomes a burden to everyone. They have to go through and figure out what to do with everything. Or it becomes a source of conflict, right? The people are fighting and occasionally killing each other. Over who's going to get the silver, and who's going to get the estate, and who's going to get the money. Lord Kapila Dev talks about this in the 3rd canto. The relatives are around lamenting, but actually they're thinking, when's my family member going to die so that I can get the various paraphernalia? So all these things that we collect and all these things that we put our energy into, they become nothing, and we become forgotten. I mean, this is something, the older that I get, the more that I think about this. Whatever we do in this world, it doesn't stay. There's nothing we do here that stays. I think about the story of King Indrajumna, who built this big temple in Jagannath Puri. And he also left the earth planet. He was traveling. When he comes back, he can't find it. It's covered by sand. And he finally just found the tip and excavated it again. So whole civilizations, we're very proud of our American civilization. Eventually it'll just be a subject of an archaeological dig. These things go away, these vast civilizations. What to speak of anything that we do? Our buildings, our possessions, our buildings, our family. I give the example all the time. I've asked this of thousands of devotees and people. So how many people know all the names of their great-great-grandparents? I've met a handful, maybe 10 people who know every name of every great-great-grandparent. That means that the grandchildren of our grandchildren will not know our name. This means it's likely like Abhimanyu and Nrsinga's children, that they won't know my name. That's how it works. Right? I've had my grandchildren say to me, "What was your mother's name again?" And this is our own family members, and it's our own family, the people that we would think would care about us the most. And this is just our name. They're not even going to remember our name. What to speak of everything that we've done, everything that we've accomplished, everything that we've built, all of our stuff. It's all gone, and we don't even care. I don't remember all my names and activities of my previous lives. Anybody here remember all the details of their previous lives? We don't even care. I've read a lot of, when I was running a Gurukul, I asked my godbrother Sadhuputta, I said, how can I help the teenagers have faith in Krishna consciousness? And one of the things he suggested was getting books about subtle phenomena and unexplained things in the world, because the kids would watch science films and things like this, and they would think all of these. Just this morning I was hearing Prabhupada talk about ghosts, and I was thinking how in society in general it's considered very stupid if you believe in ghosts. And so all this evidence, this empirical evidence, and some of this was near-death experiences. And in many near-death experiences, a person's in a car crash, or there's heart stops on the operating table, and they float above their body. And many times, the people will be there in their subtle body, looking at their gross body, and thinking, boy, that person doesn't look like they're doing very well. They don't even identifying with their body anymore. Sometimes it takes them quite a while to go, oh, that's my body lying on the street, having been hit by a car. They're just like, who is that? Oh, there's just some messed up person there. We don't even care. And yet, we're pouring our energy, right? How much of our energy is put into taking care of the things that are temporary? And how many hours do we sleep? And taking care of the shelter so we can sleep without being, bitten by bugs and troubled by the rain. I was thinking yesterday, it's raining and I have a roof, and so I'm not wet. And just, maintaining the structure and sleep and eating and, you either have to grow food or you have to work at a job to buy food, and then you have to prepare the food and then to eat the food and then to clean up after the food, and to buy the clothes and to wash the clothes and to dry the clothes and maybe to iron the clothes and to put the clothes away. And all of these things, right? And then taking care of our health. And, at this point it's like, okay, I have to get an annual checkup, and they have to do my blood work and tell me about my glucose and my cholesterol and my this and that. All of this time and energy into something that ultimately has no meaning to anybody. Anybody. Even if you get some big tomb, eventually it's finished. I mean, maybe if you're an Egyptian pharaoh, they'll dig up your mummy and put you in a museum for a while. But even that's going to be finished. Even the people that are famous for thousands and thousands of years. So this is true for everyone. This is true for the humans. It's true for the great demigods, Bhutva, Bhutva, Praliyate. It's true for the whole material world. The whole material world is burned up and flooded and then becomes the pradhan. Yes. However, after saying all these very depressing things, we know that dead human bodies are taken particular care of in society, much more than the dead bodies of other living beings. Like once it gets to be the spring, there's always dead bugs outside my door because there's a light on all night. And so between my room and the bathrooms, that whole area there, it's always covered by various dead bugs. And I just want to thank Gopal Prabhu and Hari Kirtan Prabhu, who put a sweep under the bathroom doors so that the dead bugs don't go in the bathroom. Because I used to have to be sweeping out the bathrooms 3 or 4 times a day from the dead bugs. But there's always dead bugs there, and what do I do with the dead bugs? I just sweep them into the dirt. I don't have a funeral. Could you imagine that? If we had a funeral for every dead bug body, took each dead bug body. The dead bugs get on your windshield, and you just wash them. It's just a disturbance. You just go and wash them off. Right? Even so many little animals are dying around here. Tilak the cat has given me several presents of dead mice and one dead shrew, I think. And it wasn't that I said, oh, look at that dead mouse. Let's have a ceremony. Yeah. Let's do puja. Let's cremate the body. Let's get a burial plot. Even when people have pet animals, they don't usually do this. Occasionally, but very rarely. I read many years ago about this woman in New York City. Her dog had died, and she called the city, and they said, just put the dog in a cardboard box and bring it to this area, and we'll, dispose of the body. And when she was in the subway carrying this box with her dead dog, some thief stole the box. And she just called after him, have a good day. Why? But for human bodies, we take such great care. It's a very important thing in all human societies. It's considered a great tragedy if we can't do that. Sometimes there's some natural catastrophe, or there's war or something, and there's all these unidentified bodies, and they have to put them all in a mass grave, and that's considered such a great tragedy to deal with a dead human body like that. People whose families, whose family member dies in a war or something, they want the remains returned to them so that they can properly honor them with the proper ceremony. Why is that? Why do we take such good care? I've thought about this for a very long time. Why do we take such care of a dead human body, even though it's going to become stool, ashes, etc., like any other dead body? The fate of a dead human body is not ultimately different than the fate of the dead beetle body. But why? Because there's something really special about the human body. Therefore, Prahlad Maharaj said, the human body, although it's temporary like others, although everything we're doing is just as temporary and universally just as insignificant as the life of a beetle or an ant, in this human body, we can ironically realize that we're not this body. It's the examples given that wood, there's fire inherent in wood. Right? The tree is growing by pulling the sunlight, the heat and light of the sun. And that heat and light of the sun is preserved in the wood as potential fire. And therefore, when you light it, that energy of the sun that the wood consumed, it comes out as fire. And it eventually burns the very wood that started the fire. This is the example given in the Shastra. So this human body has the capacity. We have the capacity when we, the soul, are in this human body, although it's temporary like others, and although in the ultimate scheme of things it has no more significance than any other life that exists within this world. But however, in this body we have the higher consciousness. We're less covered, and we can realize the temporary nature of the world, and we can realize I am a spiritual being. I have nothing to do with this world. and we can get out of this temporary cycle of birth and death. We don't have to keep going over and over and over again into these temporary bodies and these temporary situations, which ultimately in and of themselves have no meaning to anybody, and not even to ourselves. They have no value. But we can regain, Prabhupada will say, to revive, to regain, to remember something that does have meaning. We, the soul, actually have meaning. We are eternal. Right? Dehi nosmin yata dehi komaram yovanam dharan. Daha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra nimuyate. A sober person understands that I actually am something separate. Srila Prabhupada once asked the devotees, how do you first preach to someone? And they say, well, we try to convince them there's God. He said, no, first tell them that you're not this body. And I really took that to heart. When I was in London many years ago, this one woman who was coming to the temple asked me if I'd be willing to meet with her husband, who was completely atheistic and not at all supportive of her spiritual path. And the main thing that I talked to him about was the evidence for the fact that we're not this body. And I talked to him about empirical evidence, that there's a lot of empirical evidence, such as near-death experiences, that show that we're not this body, that we're something else. And the reason that we think that this body is important is because we're in it. The reason we think this life is important is because we, the soul, are there. Right? Lord Brahma says this to Krishna. He says that everything in this world appears pleasing and dear because it's come from your body. Because there is something that's meaningful. I mean, one of the main evidences for spirituality is that we look for meaning in something that is otherwise meaningless. Why do we keep trying to ascribe so much meaning and value to something that ultimately becomes ashes? Because there is something there. If all there was this world, we wouldn't be looking for ultimate meaning. And the people who want to say, this is it, we're just this body, we just have this life, just try to get some enjoyment out of this life before you die. But that's not enough for us as human beings. We want to say there's something that lasts, there's something that has value, there's something that has meaning, there's some purpose. There's something higher than just eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. This drive is universal. It exists even in criminals who are often very kind to their family members or to their pets. I mean, even heinous criminals. They often have love for their children or their spouse or their dog. They feel, I'm doing something good for the family. Because it must actually exist. Just like, there are creatures who live in the desert where they don't need to drink water. So they don't have thirst like we're experiencing it. But if we go to a place without water, we become thirsty because we're meant to drink water. So in this world where everything just becomes, ashes and stool, and this drive for meaning is because we come from a place of meaning where there is significance, where we are eternal, where there's no death. Nanyate hanyamane sharire, where we are not ashes and stool. That's not what we are. I mean, I talk about this a lot, but I think it's very important. When Srila Rupa Goswami describes the qualities of Krishna, and he says that those first 50 qualities are also qualities of the soul. We are beautiful. We are effulgent. We are geniuses. We have all these amazing qualities. We have our relationship with Krishna. We have our relationship with all the other residents of the spiritual world. We have an eternal service, which is very valuable to the Lord. We have some relationship with the Lord that only we have as our particular individual. And Krishna is very much concerned about that. I mean, he's concerned about what we do in this temporary world, But he's very concerned about our eternal service. When Gopakumar goes to the spiritual world, Lord Vishnu says, I was dancing like a fool, wondering in what life you were going to come to me. Saying in this life, oh, he hasn't done anything in this life. Oh, he hasn't done anything in this life. When is he going to call to me? When is he going to come to me? He said, I didn't want to break the laws of karma, but I arranged for you to take birth at Govardhan so you could actually have some spiritual life. We're important to Krishna, actually important. And the importance that we're looking for and the meaning that we're looking for can only be found there. It can't be found here. Even if you're a big king, riding on a golden chariot or riding on an elephant and being praised by so many people. The people now that have, 1 million followers, they'll be forgotten in 100 years. They just will be. And just like the people in the past are generally forgotten. I'm sure we don't even remember all of the names we had to study for our history exams and what they did. But the other is not forgotten. The other is actually eternal. Now, of course, we are very fortunate that we understand as followers of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Prabhupada, that we can spiritualize the so-called material aspects of our life also. So many people who understand this basic philosophy, they say, all right, let me not do anything in this world at all. I was really struck by my godsister Vishaka's book, 11 years, 5 months, I forget the whole title, about her meeting Srila Prabhupada. And she was talking about how when they were in India, in the northern part of India, she saw some Buddhist monks walking and thinking how these were people who had chosen to live a life intentionally where they would make the minimal mark on the world. It just could be completely unknown, to live a life separate from the world, just of renunciation. So that's often a response to this sort of understanding. Well, if nothing I do in this world has any ultimate meaning, let me stop doing anything in the world. Let me live without a home. Let me live in a cave or under a tree. Let me not make so much endeavor for eating. Let me just take roots and berries from the forest and just have, 1 or 2 pieces of cloth. Let me not bother to have a family. Let me not bother to have any kind of career in the world. Let me not interact with anyone in the world. Let me try to leave as minimal of a mark on the world, because whatever mark I leave just turns to stool and ashes anyway. So why do anything? And just have my own internal state of meditation. So that's often a response. And even we find in the Bhagavatam, especially at the end of their life, there are many great devotees who will live like that. However, our philosophy of Yukta Vairagya is that we can spiritualize this so-called material life in this body and this mind and this world. And I find that very significant. Srila Prabhupada will often talk about the iron rod in the fire. So we don't see very many blacksmiths in our daily life, and therefore we don't often see iron rods put in fire. But we do cook. And when you put the metal pot on the fire, the pot becomes as hot as the fire, as all of us who cook have experienced. Right? You can't cook for a while without getting burned by a pot. That's not possible. If you're in the kitchen long enough, you will get cuts and burns. And one of the ways you get burns is you touch a pot without realizing how hot it is, that the pot gets as hot as the fire. So when we take the activities of this body and we use them in Krishna's service and we use them in relationship to Krishna, then they also act spiritually. That's the idea of taking prasadam. That's the idea, I was hearing again, Prabhupada talk about this yesterday or the day before. Whenever you drink water, you think Krishna's the taste of water. When you see the sun, you see Krishna's the light of the sun. To spiritualize our mind, to spiritualize our body. And this is one of the reasons why that although generally in Vedic society bodies are cremated, that the bodies of great souls are not. Because the idea is that their body has become spiritualized. that it's no longer considered, oh, this is just a lump of ashes. There's some interesting stories, again, with the kind of books I got that Sadhaputta recommended, of Christian saints whose bodies have never decomposed. And there's some of them that even give off fragrant substances, 200 years later. And anyone who takes this and will get cured of various diseases. That their bodies are not material, their bodies have become spiritualized. Now, of course, even then, everything is going to eventually be destroyed. But we can have that. Our home can be made into a tirtha. Our body, the whole idea of tilak is that our body becomes a temple, our body becomes a tirtha. And then even though what we do in this world is not significant from a material point of view, it becomes significant as part of our spiritual journey. And therefore we have in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna is pushing for this, well, I'm just going to leave everything and I'm not going to work in this world, it's all just abominable. And Krishna says, no, I want you to work in the world, but for me. I want you to work in the world with spiritual consciousness. Krishna wants us to spiritualize the world. And it's really nice that Srila Rupa Goswami is telling us that externally we live a life as a spiritual person in the world, and internally we meditate on our eternal spiritual activities. This is the instruction given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Raghunath Das Goswami also. I mean, at first the instruction was given is, look, don't act like a crazy fellow. Act in such a way in the world that everyone just thinks you're a normal person, but meditate on me within. So this is how we are supposed to act. We're supposed to be cultivating and awakening and growing our spiritual body within by meditating on the eternal pastimes of the Lord. And externally, we work in a way that is spiritualized to bring Krishna consciousness to the world and to transform, as Srila Prabhupada so nicely says in his purport to 424, to transform matter into spirit. Because ultimately, this material energy is material only if we're engaged in forgetting Krishna. As soon as we remember Krishna, then it becomes spiritualized. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if we don't do this, then we will simply be, as Muchukunda is doing about his life, lamenting. Why did I put all my energy into temporary things? So questions, comments? Sorry, this is one of these heavy, sobering verses. Yeah. Last week.
About this life.
Yeah. Well, it was like that, My granddaughter goes rollerblading for exercise.
Yeah.
And she took us all to seeing a local ice skating performance. And when I was watching it, I was thinking, when I was a kid, I used to ice skate all the time. I used to ice skate at Rockefeller Center in New York and at a lake in New Jersey in the winter. And I can barely remember it. Like, barely. I used to ice skate all the time. And, like who was I ice skating with and how well was I ice skating? What was I doing? It just, I said to Sri Arjuna, I said, I feel like it was another lifetime, another person who did that you barely remember that. So, yeah. And that's a good thing to keep in mind when we're thinking something's very important in the present moment. Like sometimes we can remember, I remember I had an argument with my husband 5 years ago. What was it about? I don't know what we were arguing. I remember we had an argument, but I don't remember what it was about anymore. So, we tend to think that things are, but they're not. Yeah. They're not even important to us, or to speak of to anybody else.
Yes. I had actually an interesting experience after I came back to New Goloka. I was gone for 6 years, and I'm usually very good visually. I can remember roads and everything.
Yeah.
So when I first came back, I was going through roads and saying, this is not the way I remember this road. This, it used to be shorter in my mind, or it used to be different, and even I couldn't remember where in one of Costco in Durham was. That part of Durham was completely gone. Once I went there, kind of like just came back, but it was just completely gone.
Well, I had the same experience coming back here in 2020. It took me a while to reorient myself. Yeah. Yes?
So you touched on it a little bit, but I'm just curious more like how to actually deal with the balancing, like, okay, the ultimate reality is no significance at all with like, okay, day to day I gotta, whatever, clean up after my kids or wash the car or, it's like we're going to just be a double person or something.
I remember many years ago, Bhatuko Papabu was giving a class on this similar topic and talking about how doctors they're in the operating theater and they're seeing the nature of the body and yet they're flirting with the other people in the operating room. And he was saying, like, we have to keep this mentality of, I could die at any moment and everything just turns into a pile of ashes, along with at the same time feeling, okay, what I'm doing is important in Krishna's service. And I see it's just a question, again, of that I'm doing everything for Krishna in the now and in the now. In this moment, I'm dedicating everything I don't see it as a question of balancing it. I see that I'm doing everything for Krishna in this moment. And the ultimate result of it is not what I'm focused on. I'm focused on this moment connection. Does that help? Srila Prabhupada ki jai.